1 million tokens, that's the headline. But the harder number is 76%. That's what Opus 4.6 scored on Anthropic's long context test, while Sonnet 4.5 scored 18.5%. So, is that enough to say the larger window works? That's the question we're answering. And getting to a useful answer means separating three things that are very easy to blur together: advertised capacity, measured performance, and the boundary of the evidence. What follows is a focused, numbers-first comparison of Opus 4.6 and Sonnet 4.5 on the named long context evaluation. Then we'll reach a verdict that clearly separates the measured result from everything that remains unproven. Claude Opus 4.6 shipped with a beta 1 million token context window. That's the product claim at the center of this comparison. A context window describes how much material a model can accept within a single interaction. But the size of that window isn't, by itself, a performance score. A large capacity tells us what can fit. It doesn't automatically tell us how effectively the model handles all the information placed inside that capacity. And that distinction matters, because developers need demonstrated long context performance, not just a large number attached to an input limit. We're keeping this comparison deliberately narrow. We're looking only at Claude Opus 4.6 and Sonnet 4.5 on Anthropic's reported long context test. We're not turning one result into a general model ranking, and we're not using it as a shortcut to make claims about unrelated workflows. The central question is precise. Did Opus 4.6's beta 1 million token context window arrive alongside a measurable advantage over Sonnet 4.5 on this particular evaluation? By keeping the scope fixed, we give the numbers a clear meaning. We also avoid stretching a specific result into a much broader claim than the evidence can actually support. Here's the direct result. Opus 4.6 scored 76% on Anthropic's long context test. Sonnet 4.5 scored 18.5% in the same reported comparison. Before we interpret anything, those are the two measurements to keep in view: 76 and 18.5. Both numbers come from the named company evaluation, and together they produce a very clear head-to-head outcome. On this test, Opus 4.6 didn't edge ahead by a small margin. Its reported score was substantially higher than Sonnet 4.5's. Now subtract 18.5 from 76. The difference is 57.5 percentage points. That's the absolute gap between the two reported scores. We can also express the comparison as a ratio. 76 divided by 18.5 is roughly 4.1. In other words, Opus 4.6 achieved about 4.1 times Sonnet 4.5's score on this evaluation. Percentage points and score ratios describe different relationships, so they shouldn't be treated as interchangeable. But here, both lead us to the same immediate conclusion. The reported separation was large, easy to see, and decisively in Opus 4.6's favor. This is where the context window claim starts to mean more. The 1 million token figure tells us the advertised capacity. The 76% result gives us a reported measure of performance on a long context test. And because Opus 4.6 scored 57.5 percentage points above Sonnet 4.5, the supplied evidence supports the claim that Opus 4.6 delivered a long context advantage on Anthropic's evaluation. Crucially, that support comes from the measured gap. It doesn't come simply from seeing a larger number in the model specification. That makes the evaluation result stronger evidence than the advertised context window size would be on its own. If all we knew was that Opus 4.6 could accept up to 1 million tokens in beta, we'd know its stated capacity. We still wouldn't know whether that capacity translated into better results. The head-to-head score adds that missing performance layer. On Anthropic's test, Opus 4.6 paired the larger advertised window with a dramatically higher reported score than Sonnet 4.5. That gives us a defensible connection between the product claim and a measured outcome, as long as we continue naming the test that produced that outcome. For developers, that distinction is the real analytical value in this comparison. Token capacity can be treated as a specification. A score is evidence from an evaluation. The 76% result doesn't merely repeat the 1 million token headline, it puts something measurable behind the claim. Within the boundaries of the supplied findings, this is the strongest conclusion available. Opus 4.6 demonstrated a substantial long context advantage over Sonnet 4.5 in Anthropic's own comparison. That result answers our narrow question positively, and it does so without requiring us to make assumptions about anything that wasn't tested or reported. Now we need to draw the boundary. This was Anthropic's own test. That fact doesn't erase the result, and it doesn't change the arithmetic. Opus 4.6 still scored 76%. Sonnet 4.5 still scored 18.5%, and the reported gap is still 57.5 percentage points. The supplied findings support a company-reported win on a named test. They don't establish independent validation. This comparison also can't establish superiority across other tasks or evaluations. A strong, long-context result on this test is evidence about this test. It isn't evidence for every possible developer workflow, and it doesn't automatically become a universal model ranking. We don't have supplied findings here showing how these two models compare across different task designs, independent evaluations, or specific production environments. Any claim that extends into those areas would go beyond the available evidence. So, the disciplined reading is specific and straightforward. One useful way to picture that boundary is with two columns. In the supported column, Opus 4.6 beat Sonnet 4.5 on Anthropic's long context test, with scores of 76% and 18.5%. In the unproven column, independent validation and superiority across other tasks or evaluations. Keeping those columns separate isn't a retreat from the result. It's exactly what makes the verdict credible. We can recognize a major measured advantage without pretending that one company-reported evaluation answers every broader question a developer might reasonably have. So here's the defensible verdict. Claude Opus 4.6 seconds long context claim held up on Anthropic's test. It scored 76%, compared with Sonnet 4.5 at 18.5%. That's a lead of 57.5 percentage points and a score roughly 4.1 times as high. For this named evaluation, Opus 4.6 is the clear winner. And the measured result supports the claim more strongly than the 1 million token specification ever could on its own. But our final sentence needs to be every bit as precise as our first. Treat Opus 4.6 as the clear winner for Anthropic's reported long context evaluation. Hold off on a broader workflow recommendation until independent or task-specific evidence becomes available. The million token headline got the attention, but the 76% score is the more useful number. It shows a measurable advantage here. It doesn't establish a general or independent victory everywhere. The next meaningful check is whether this advantage appears beyond Anthropic's own test. Independent evaluations or developer-relevant and task-specific comparisons would tell us whether the same pattern holds under different conditions. Until that evidence is supplied, the correct takeaway remains both bounded and strong. Opus 4.6 won this specific comparison by 57.5 percentage points and scored roughly 4 times as high as Sonnet 4.5. Anthropic's own evaluation supports its long context claim. Broader superiority, however, remains unproven. If you'd like more numbers-first breakdowns of AI models, software, and open source technology, subscribe to Neural Stack. And let me know in the comments which developer-relevant long context evaluation you'd like to see examined next.